The morning sun was just starting to peep through the clouds as Rita Kumar hurried through her usual morning routine. As a pediatric nurse at Memorial Hospital, she knew the importance of being on time for her shift. The autumn air was crisp, making her grateful for the warm coffee in her travel mug as she helped her sleepy 7-year-old daughter, Mira, into her coat. "Remember to finish your math homework at Grandma's," Rita reminded her daughter, smoothing down her messy ponytail. The little girl nodded, still yawning, her backpack almost as big as she was. Rita couldn't help but smile. Mornings like these were precious, even if they were hectic. The drive to her mother's house was peaceful, with the trees showing off their beautiful orange and red colors. Rita had always loved this time of year, when the world seemed to paint itself in warm colors. She watched through the rearview mirror as Mira dozed off in her car seat, clutching her favorite stuffed elephant. After dropping Mira off with a quick hug and a thank you to her mom, Rita settled into her normal route to work. The familiar streets were relatively empty, just the way she liked them. Her old but reliable Honda hummed softly as she drove, while her dashboard camera, a recent purchase she'd made after hearing about some troubling traffic stops in the area, recorded her journey quietly. Rita checked her watch. 6:45 a.m. Perfect timing. She'd make it to her shift with enough time to grab another coffee from the break room. Her mind wandered to her young patients, especially little Tommy, who was scheduled for his final chemotherapy session today. She'd promised to bring him his favorite dinosaur stickers if he stayed brave through the treatment. The radio played softly in the background, and Rita hummed along to an old song she remembered from her college days. The morning felt so normal, so routine, the kind of morning where nothing extraordinary was supposed to happen. She stopped at the familiar intersection near the hospital, making sure to come to a complete stop like she always did. The dashboard camera blinked steadily, capturing every moment of what was about to become a very different kind of morning. Just as she started to pull away from the stop sign, red and blue lights suddenly flashed in her rearview mirror. Rita's heart skipped a beat. She was certain she'd done nothing wrong. She'd been driving this route for 5 years, knew every stop sign and speed limit by heart. As she carefully pulled over to the side of the road, she had no idea that this routine traffic stop was about to turn into something that would change not just her morning, but the lives of many others in ways she couldn't imagine. Rita's hands trembled slightly as she pulled over to the curb, carefully placing them at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, just like her father had taught her years ago. The police cruiser's flashing lights painted the interior of her car in alternating red and blue. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that she had done nothing wrong. Through her side mirror, she watched as Officer Barrett stepped out of his patrol car. Something about his walk, stiff and aggressive, made her stomach tighten. She quickly checked that her seatbelt was still fastened and reached for her license and registration, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. The tap on her window was more like a bang, making her jump despite her preparation. As she lowered the window, the morning air carried in the scent of coffee and aftershave. "License and registration," Officer Barrett barked, not even finishing his sentence before adding, "You think stop signs are optional in this neighborhood?" "No, sir," Rita replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I came to a complete stop." "Don't lie to me," he cut her off, his voice rising. "I was right there. I saw you roll right through it." His flashlight beam swept across her face, then through her car interior, the light harsh and invasive in the early morning darkness. Rita's nursing training kicked in, the same calm she used when dealing with anxious parents in the pediatric ward. "Officer, I understand your concern, but I definitely stopped. I drive this route every morning to work, and I—" "Step out of the vehicle." He interrupted again, his hand resting on his belt in a way that made Rita's throat go dry. "Now." Rita's thoughts flew to Mira, to her patients waiting at the hospital, to the dashboard camera silently recording everything. She carefully unbuckled her seatbelt, saying clearly, "I'm going to step out slowly, officer. Her fingers brushed against her phone and the cup holder, and she wished she could call someone, anyone. The morning air felt colder now as she stepped onto the pavement. Other cars drove past slowly, their drivers' faces a mix of curiosity and concern. Rita stood straight, her scrubs and hospital ID badge clearly visible. Her hands relaxed at her sides where the officer could see them. Officer Barrett circled her like a prowling cat, his boots scraping against the pavement. "Where are you coming from? Where are you heading?" His questions came rapid fire, barely giving her time to answer. When she mentioned the hospital, he scoffed. "Sure, and I'm the chief of surgery." Rita felt a flicker of anger beneath her fear. She'd worked hard for her position, earned every bit of respect she had at the hospital. But she kept her voice level, remembering what her mother always said. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay calm. Just then, another set of red and blue lights appeared in the distance. Rita watched in her peripheral vision as a second patrol car pulled up, hoping this might change the situation. She had no idea that this new arrival was about to shift everything in ways neither she nor Officer Barrett could expect. The temperature seemed to drop another few degrees as they waited for the second officer to approach. The only sounds were the tick-tick-tick of cooling engines, the rustle of Officer Barrett's uniform as he shifted his weight, and the quiet hum of passing traffic. Rita's hospital ID badge caught the flashing lights, sending little blue and red reflections dancing across the pavement, a strange light show for what was turning into the most unsettling morning of her life. The morning had grown unusually quiet, broken only by the rhythmic flash of police lights and the soft whisper of passing cars. Rita stood perfectly still, her hospital ID badge catching the early sunlight. Her feet were starting to hurt in her nursing shoes, but she didn't dare move. Officer Barrett was still circling her car, his flashlight beam cutting through windows despite the growing daylight. "Open the trunk," he demanded, his voice carrying the kind of authority that seemed more about power than protection. Rita nodded, reaching slowly for her key fob. The trunk popped open with a soft click, revealing her usual work gear, a spare set of scrubs, her lunch bag, and a box of new storybooks she'd bought for the children's ward. Officer Barrett rummaged through her belongings, tossing aside the carefully packed items. The special dinosaur stickers she promised little Tommy scattered across the trunk's floor. "What's in the lunch bag?" he questioned, already unzipping it before she could answer. A small crowd had begun to form. Morning commuters had slowed down, some parking their cars at a safe distance. Rita could see people holding up phones, recording everything. Under different circumstances, she might have felt embarrassed being the center of attention. But right now, those watching eyes felt like a strange comfort. "Look at all these people watching," Officer Barrett sneered, gesturing at the growing audience. "You must be loving this attention." His words carried a bite that made Rita's skin crawl, but she remembered her training from difficult hospital situations. Stay professional, stay calm, document everything. A young woman in a business suit had stepped out of her car, phone clearly recording. "Are you okay?" she called out to Rita. Before Rita could respond, Officer Barrett turned sharply. "Get back in your car, or you'll be next." The woman stood her ground, phone steady, though Rita could see her hands shaking. More cars were stopping now. An elderly man in a delivery uniform. A couple of college students with backpacks. A construction worker in his yellow vest. They all kept their distance but stayed present, silent witnesses to the unfolding scene. Their presence felt like a protective circle, even as Officer Barrett's behavior grew more erratic. "Why are your hands shaking?" he demanded, turning back to Rita. "Guilty people shake. What are you hiding?" Rita took a steady breath, the same way she did before entering a difficult patient's room. "Officer, I'm shaking because I'm scared," she admitted honestly. "I've done nothing wrong, but you're treating me like a criminal." Her words seemed to hang in the morning air. Someone in the crowd murmured in agreement. Officer Barrett's face reddened. He stepped closer, his badge catching the sunlight. "You think having an audience makes you brave? Let's see how brave you are when I—" The sound of a car door closing cut through his words. The second police officer was finally approaching, her footsteps measured and purposeful on the pavement. Rita felt a shift in the air, like the moment before a storm breaks. The growing crowd of witnesses seemed to collectively hold their breath. The dashboard camera in Rita's car blinked steadily, its small red light a reminder that everything, every word, every action, every abuse of power, was being recorded. As the second officer drew closer, Rita silently thanked her mother for insisting she install that camera just a month ago. She had no way of knowing that this small device, combined with the phones recording around her, would soon become powerful tools of justice. Officer Lee had seen a lot in her 15 years on the force, but something about this scene immediately set off alarm bells in her mind. As she stepped out of her patrol car, she took in every detail with practiced precision. The small crowd of onlookers with their phones raised. The scattered contents of a trunk. A woman in nursing scrubs standing perfectly still. And her colleague, Officer Barrett, whose body language screamed tension. The morning sun had fully risen now, casting long shadows across the street. Officer Lee adjusted her body camera, ensuring it was recording as she approached. She'd worked with Barrett before, but something was different today. His stance was too aggressive, his movements too sharp for a simple traffic stop. "Morning," Officer Lee called out, her voice carrying the calm authority that came from years of experience. She noticed how the woman in scrubs, whose name tag read Rita Kumar, RN, seemed to breathe a little easier at her arrival. The slight tremor in Rita's hands didn't escape her attention either. "Just handling a traffic violation," Barrett snapped, but Lee caught the defensive edge in his voice. She'd learned long ago that the best officers listened more than they spoke, so she simply nodded and turned to Rita. "Ma'am, could you tell me what happened this morning?" Lee asked, positioning herself where she could see both Rita and Barrett. The crowd had grown quieter, phones still recording, but people leaning in to hear. "I was driving to my shift at Memorial Hospital," Rita explained, her voice steadier now. "I stopped completely at the sign back there, just like I do every morning. I have a dashboard camera that recorded everything." Officer Lee noticed how Barrett shifted at the mention of the camera, his hand tightening on his belt. A car passed by slowly, its driver craning their neck to watch. The morning breeze carried the smell of someone's breakfast from a nearby house, a strangely normal scent in this tense situation. She ran that stop sign clear as day. Barrett interrupted, but Lee held up a hand, silently asking him to wait. She'd noticed something else. The scattered dinosaur stickers in the trunk, the carefully packed lunch bag now emptied. This wasn't adding up to the dangerous traffic offender Barrett was making Rita out to be. The construction worker who'd been watching stepped forward slightly. "We've all been recording," he said quietly. "Been here about 10 minutes. Others in the crowd nodded, their phones steady, documenting every moment. Lee had seen enough videos of bad police interactions to know how important these recordings could be, for everyone's safety. She glanced at Rita's car, noting the dashboard camera's blinking light. The pieces were coming together in her mind, painting a picture she didn't like. A young mother in the crowd was holding her child, who pointed at Rita's nurse badge and whispered something. The moment struck Lee particularly hard. This was about more than just a traffic stop now. It was about trust, about doing the right thing, about showing that little child what good policing looked like. She turned back to Rita, her decision made. "Would you mind if we review your dashboard camera footage together?" she asked, knowing this simple request would change the course of the morning. As Rita nodded gratefully, Officer Lee could feel Barrett's stare burning into her back. But she'd learned long ago that being a good police officer meant standing up for what's right, even when, especially when, It meant standing up to another officer. The inside of Rita's car felt like a safe haven as Officer Lee leaned in to watch the dashboard camera footage. The small screen showed a clear view of the morning's events. Rita's complete stop at the sign, the steady count of 3 seconds, and then the careful continuation of her journey. Officer Lee's face remained professional, but her eyes narrowed slightly as she watched. "Could you play that one more time?" she asked quietly. Rita nodded, rewinding the footage. The morning sun created a glare on the screen, but the truth was undeniable. In the background, Officer Barrett shifted his weight from foot to foot, his earlier confidence visibly cracking. The crowd of onlookers remained, though they'd grown quieter now. The construction worker checked his watch, but made no move to leave. The young mother had started recording with a second phone when her first one ran low on battery. Everyone seemed to sense that they were witnessing something important. Officer Lee straightened up and turned to her colleague. "Barrett, a word?" Her tone was professional but firm, the kind that left no room for argument. They stepped away from Rita's car, but not before Lee had carefully copied down the exact timestamp from the dashboard camera. The two officers spoke in hushed tones near Barrett's patrol car. Even from a distance, the shift in power was clear. Barrett's shoulders slumped, his earlier aggression deflating under Lee's steady gaze. The watching crowd murmured quietly, sensing the change in the air. "I've got the phone footage too," called out the businesswoman who'd stood her ground earlier. She held up her phone, its memory now storing crucial minutes of the morning's events. Officer Lee nodded acknowledgement, making a mental note. Rita stood by her car, finally feeling the tension start to leave her body. She checked her watch. Her shift had started 15 minutes ago. As if reading her thoughts, Officer Lee walked back over, her notepad in hand. "Miss Kumar," Lee began, her voice carrying both authority and kindness. "I've reviewed the footage and spoken with my colleague. There was clearly no traffic violation here." She paused, making sure her next words carried weight. "I want to apologize for how this situation was handled." The morning breeze rustled through nearby trees as Lee continued. "I'm going to give you my card. It has my badge number and contact information. I'll also provide you with information about filing a formal complaint, if you choose to do so." Her words were measured, each one carefully chosen. Officer Barrett remained by his car, radio in hand, presumably calling in to report the situation to their supervisor. His earlier swagger had vanished, replaced by the stiff posture of someone who knew they'd made a serious mistake. The crowd began to disperse slowly, each person somehow knowing their role as witnesses had mattered. The construction worker gave Rita a small nod before heading back to his truck. The young mother smiled, her child waving at Rita's nurse badge. Even in difficult moments, humanity showed its better side. "Your hospital supervisor will receive a call explaining the situation," Officer Lee assured Rita, understanding the importance of professional accountability. "And I want you to know, this isn't what we stand for. What happened here today will be addressed." As Rita gathered her scattered belongings from the trunk, carefully collecting each dinosaur sticker for little Tommy, she felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief, certainly, but also a deep appreciation for how one person's integrity could change everything. Officer Lee stood nearby, ensuring everything was in order, her presence a reminder that there were still people who believed in doing what's right. The morning had warmed considerably by the time Rita finally pulled into the hospital parking lot. Her hands had stopped shaking, but her mind kept replaying the events like a movie she couldn't pause. Officer Lee's business card sat carefully tucked in her scrub pocket, its edges already slightly worn from her nervous fingers. As she walked through the hospital's automatic doors, the familiar antiseptic smell and buzzing fluorescent lights helped ground her. A few of her coworkers looked up as she entered, their faces showing concern at her unusual lateness. The head nurse, Mrs. Patel, was already walking towards her with a mix of worry and relief on her face. "Rita, I just got off the phone with the police department," Mrs. Patel said, guiding her to the break room. Take a few minutes to collect yourself. Your patients are covered. The kindness in her supervisor's voice nearly brought tears to Rita's eyes. In the quiet of the break room, Rita pulled out her phone. 3 missed calls from her mother, probably wondering why she hadn't texted after her shift started. As she dialed back, her hand brushed against the folder Officer Lee had given her, the one containing formal complaint procedures. Beta, are you okay? Her mother's worried voice came through immediately. You always text when you reach work. Rita found herself explaining everything, her mother's quiet speaking volumes about years of similar experiences their family had faced. A soft knock on the break room door interrupted her call. It was Dr. Chen, one of the senior pediatricians. Your little friend Tommy's been asking for you, he said with a gentle smile. Something about promised dinosaur stickers. Rita felt a wave of gratitude. For her colleagues' understanding, for Officer Lee's intervention, even for all those strangers who'd stopped to witness and record. She reached for the slightly crumpled packet of stickers she'd rescued from her trunk. I'll be right there, she said, standing up straighter. Just need to fill out this form first. She pulled out Officer Lee's folder, knowing that speaking up wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the next person who might face a similar situation. Mrs. Patel returned with a cup of chamomile tea, setting it beside Rita as she started writing. Take your time, she said, patting Rita's shoulder. Documentation is important. Coming from a nurse supervisor, those words carried extra weight. Through the break room window, Rita could see the busy hospital world continuing. Nurses rushing past with charts, doctors discussing cases, families waiting anxiously for news. Her own morning drama felt simultaneously huge and tiny in comparison to the daily life and death situations these halls witnessed. She checked her phone one last time before starting the complaint form. The businesswoman from earlier had somehow found Rita's professional profile and sent her the video footage. In case you need it, the message read, followed by thank you for being so brave. Brave? Rita hadn't felt brave at the time. She'd been terrified. But maybe bravery wasn't about not being scared. Maybe it was about doing the right thing despite being scared. She picked up her pen and began writing, her nurse's training making the documentation precise and clear. The dinosaur stickers caught her eye as she wrote, reminding her that somewhere upstairs, a young patient was waiting for his promised reward for bravery. Rita smiled slightly. Maybe she and Tommy could teach each other something about being brave today. 2 weeks after the incident, Rita sat in a clean, well-lit office at the police department's Internal Affairs Division. The investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Officer Chen, had spread several documents across her desk. The dashboard camera footage played silently on a screen behind her, alongside videos from 3 different bystanders. Your complaint wasn't the first, Officer Chen explained, her voice steady and professional. But it might be the most thoroughly documented. She gestured to the screen where Officer Barrett could be seen circling Rita's car. The community involvement here made a difference. The businesswoman who'd recorded everything had come forward with her footage immediately. The construction worker had written a detailed statement. Even the young mother had submitted her recordings, along with a letter describing how the incident had affected her view of law enforcement. Look at this, Officer Chen said, turning her computer screen towards Rita. Multiple tabs were open. All formal complaints filed against Officer Barrett over the past year. Most had been dismissed due to lack of evidence. Your dashboard camera changed everything. Sometimes all we need is proof to do the right thing. Rita watched as Chen clicked through the footage again. It felt strange seeing herself from this angle, standing perfectly still, hands visible, voice steady despite her fear. The morning sun in the video caught her nurse's badge, making it shine like a beacon. Officer Lee's report was very detailed. Chen continued, lifting the thick folder. Her body camera footage matches perfectly with the civilian recordings and your dashboard camera. She paused, making sure Rita understood the significance. That kind of consistency matters. A gentle knock interrupted them. The police chief himself stepped in, his presence both surprising and reassuring. "Ms. Kumar," he said, taking a seat, "I wanted to personally update you on our investigation's progress." As he spoke, Rita thought about her mother's reaction when she told her about filing the complaint. "Good," her mother had said firmly. "Change only happens when brave people speak up." Now, sitting in this office, watching these officers take her experience seriously, she felt the truth of those words. The investigation had expanded beyond just that morning. Officer Barrett's previous complaints were being reopened, examined with new eyes. The department was reviewing its training procedures, particularly around traffic stops and de-escalation techniques. "Your case is becoming a teaching example," the chief explained, pointing to a new training manual on Chen's desk. "How a routine traffic stop should never be handled, and how proper intervention can make all the difference." Outside the office windows, life at the police station continued. Officers coming and going, phones ringing, the normal buzz of a busy precinct. Rita watched a young officer walk past, learning materials tucked under his arm. She wondered if he would soon be studying her case, learning from what happened that morning. The chief handed her a formal letter, apologizing for Barrett's conduct and outlining the steps being taken. "Officer Lee sends her regards," he added. "Her intervention that morning is exactly what we expect from our officers." As Rita prepared to leave, Officer Chen walked her to the door. "You know," she said quietly, "some people might have just wanted to forget about it and move on. Filing a complaint, coming in for interviews, it takes courage. But it also creates change." Rita thought about little Tommy at the hospital, now finished with his chemotherapy. He'd been so proud of his bravery certificate. Maybe courage wasn't always about big, dramatic moments. Sometimes it was just about doing what needed to be done, one small step at a time. 3 months after that unforgettable morning, Rita pulled up to the same stop sign where everything had started. The autumn trees had lost their leaves, and winter was creeping in. But this time, something was different. A new traffic camera had been installed, part of the police department's improved monitoring system. She smiled, remembering the letter she'd received last week. Officer Barrett had been required to complete extensive retraining, focusing on cultural sensitivity and proper traffic stop procedures. More importantly, the department had introduced new accountability measures, including mandatory dashboard cameras in all patrol cars. At the hospital, Rita's experience had sparked changes too. The administration had started a program helping staff deal with difficult situations outside of work. Mrs. Patel had asked Rita to share her story during new employee orientation, focusing on the importance of speaking up and documenting incidents. "You know what really made a difference?" Rita told her colleagues during one such session. "It wasn't just my dashboard camera. It was all those people who stopped to watch and record. The businesswoman, the construction worker, the young mom. They didn't even know me, but they knew something wasn't right." The changes rippled out in unexpected ways. The local news had picked up the story, not focusing on the confrontation, but on how the system had worked when everyone did their part. From Officer Lee's intervention to the thorough investigation that followed. One chilly morning, Rita spotted Officer Lee directing traffic near the hospital. They waved to each other, sharing a moment of recognition. Later that day, Lee stopped by the pediatric ward with a donation. New books for the children's reading corner. "The department's trying to build better connections with the community," she explained, but her smile suggested it was more personal than that. The businesswoman who'd recorded everything had become a friendly face too. Rita learned her name was Mrs. Wu, and she ran a local tech company. Inspired by Rita's experience, she'd started a program providing free dashboard cameras to local nurses and healthcare workers. Even Rita's mother had noticed the change in her daughter. "You stand taller now," she said one evening over dinner. Like someone who knows their voice matters. Rita watched as her daughter, Mira, played with her toys nearby, hoping she was learning these same lessons about courage and standing up for what's right. The police chief had kept his word about using her case for training. New officers now studied the incident, learning not just what went wrong, but how proper intervention and community involvement could make things right. Officer Lee's actions that morning had become a model for professional police conduct. Rita kept the letter of apology from the department, not as a reminder of the fear she'd felt that morning, but as proof that speaking up could create real change. The young mother who'd recorded the incident had sent her a message recently. She'd used Rita's story to teach her child about standing up for others. 1 year to the day after the incident, Rita drove the same route to work. The stop sign was still there, the traffic camera keeping its quiet watch. As she made her complete stop, just like always, she thought about how one morning had created such lasting change. In the hospital parking lot, she spotted a new sign: security cameras in operation, keeping our healthcare workers safe. It was a small change, maybe, but part of something bigger. As Rita walked into work, her nurse's badge catching the morning light, she knew that sometimes the biggest changes start with one person willing to stop and do the right thing.